Hi there, Baltimore. My name is Fernando, and I was supposed to be there with you today giving this talk. Instead, I'm here in the middle of Europe, in the Czech Republic. And why is that? Oh well, because COVID. Isn't it funny? We can now give an excuse just using one word, because COVID. And it's interesting because it works because we all know what the effect that COVID has had in all our traveling and all our activities. And the interesting thing about this is that COVID has managed to change our collective behavior at the same time, everywhere. For example, today instead of going with you to have dinner somewhere nice there in Baltimore, or to be listening to these talks, maybe I will spend the day here fishing. And you wonder how many more people might have had this idea about fishing. Because if you think about it, fishing is one of the few activities that you could continue doing while in lockdown in most places. Everything else was closed or it was prohibited. You couldn't go to the shops, you couldn't go to the cinema. But if you have access to a place like this nearby, it's a fantastic activity to spend your time. And this is going to be the topic of my talk today. Did the collective behavior and the individual behavior of anglers change because of COVID in different countries? That's it. So let's go to the office and see if this really happened. Well, the first thing we need is to know how many anglers are there. But with the COVID situation, data from traditional sources such as sales of licenses or surveys or self-reporting could be limited in detecting rapid and short-term behavioral changes. But luckily, some geolocating apps and fish finding devices are becoming quite popular among anglers, and they can be really good sources of information. For example, with this. This is called Deeper, and it's a portable sonar that you can use to map the bottom of the river or the lake where you are fishing. You can even use it to try and find fish. You can look for the schools, and understandably many anglers are using it. Well, thanks to a data sharing agreement with this company, we can now analyze anonymous data from the users of this sonar, and we know when and where these devices were used. Of course, the sonar users are just a subset of all the anglers. So before extrapolating the results of analysis in this kind of data, first we should calibrate it with another direct method. Well, that's the topic of an upcoming paper and also the topic of another talk in this conference. So if you want to know more, my colleague Justas will explain it in detail. To summarize it briefly, what we did was calibrating the sonar data with a visual census using drones. And we can now extrapolate the numbers with reasonable accuracy, at least in Lithuania. What does this calibration look like? At any given time of all anglers fishing in normal liquid water like that one, around 2% will be using the sonar device, and this proportion will rise to 15% during the ice fishing season, because this device is really popular to go ice fishing. What I'm gonna show you today are our preliminary analysis for the data we have for this country, Lithuania. We will look at how anglers have adapted to lockdowns and other containing measures when fishing in rivers and lakes of this country. So our first question, has the fishing effort changed because of COVID? This is what has happened for the past few years. Each dot represents the daily number of users of this sonar device in Lithuania. And highlighted in blue, you can see the dates when Lithuania was in lockdown. Let me use a pointer here. Here you can see something interesting, which is like, it looks like the users started to come up with the first lockdown. And then we have these other 3 big peaks, and these are actually ice events. And as I said before, the device is quite popular for ice fishing. That's why we see these peaks here. During the ice fishing season, it's actually 8 times more probable that an angler is using this device. That's why from now on we will analyze the data separately for data from the ice fishing season and data for seasons without ice. And what about the lockdowns? Given that they involve movement restrictions, we could predict already that their effect will depend on where in Lithuania you were. In fact, it is quite possible that in sparsely populated areas, COVID lockdowns have decreased the fishing effort because people from the cities couldn't go there. So our prediction should be that in densely populated areas, we could see an increase in number of anglers, and we wouldn't see it or even see a negative one in sparsely populated areas. Let's check first the data for the ice season and see what happens. Now we are looking at the weekly number of sonar users. And these colors show 3 levels for the municipalities according to the population density. And we will compare ice days when people were able to move freely with dates in which movement was restricted. And the effect is quite clear for densely populated areas. There, the fishing effort per municipality almost tripled, actually 2.89, but with a very high variability. Now let's look at dates when the water was not frozen. We should remind you that for this analysis we use mixed effect models, and of course we control for the increasing uptake of the product of the device by the angler. We do that in 2 ways. Either using scale number of trips, dividing by the number of sonar owners at this month, or by including uptake as a random effect. And either way, the results are very similar. And again, we are looking at the weekly number of sonar usage events, which we assume correlates to the weekly number of anglers. And the colors indicate again the population density. Now, without ice, we have more dates to play with. So we can look at more specific changes in behavior across the whole pandemic. The effect of the first lockdown was significant for the 3 levels of population density, with the relative average number of trips increasing almost 8 times for sparsely populated areas and more than 9 times for intermediate and densely populated areas. Again, with a huge variation in this last category. And after the first lockdown, when the restrictions were lifted temporarily, medium and major cities showed a reduction, but still quite high numbers compared to pre-pandemic times. And small towns increased even more than during the first lockdown. And this effect was maintained during the second and after the second lockdown. Okay, it seems that more anglers went fishing during the pandemic, but now the second question. Did some anglers go fishing more often? Did COVID change the behavior of some anglers? Something we can predict already is that not everybody will respond equally to the lockdowns. For example, we could think that a very eager angler and a casual angler will respond differently. Luckily, we have individual data, which is anonymous, but we can see what each angler is doing across the whole timeline. Once more, we start with the ice season. And for this analysis, we group the anglers in 3 categories, those 3 colors, that are based on their median number of trips by month. And it's interesting to see that for ice fishing, casual and intermediate anglers didn't make much of a change compared to the increase in activity for eager anglers. But what happened when there was no ice? Here again, we have more data and we can analyze more detailed stages of the pandemic. We can see again an increase in fishing trips per month during the first lockdown, and this time casual anglers doubled their trip rate, and intermediate anglers increased their number of trips on average 1.6. Eager anglers also almost doubled their relative average, 1.8, with again the largest variation, and this effect is maintained when the first lockdown is finished. We can see that the levels dropped during the second lockdown, and in this case we really think it was probably because the weather was really bad in those dates, and perhaps that's why we see this slight recovery for the eager anglers after the second lockdown. Coming back to our initial plot, now we understand it a bit better and know how the COVID restrictions affected the behavior of Lithuanian anglers. But was it the same in other countries? For example, this is what happened in Denmark, where we don't see those ice peaks that we had in Lithuania. And this is the Czech Republic, which shows a very different seasonality. Naturally, and there are differences in the number of users of the sonar as the product gets more popular in each country. But we can already suspect that there are differences in the behavior of the anglers and the effect that the COVID-related restrictions or the lack of them had in the behavior of the people of each country. There are still lots of COVID-related effects to analyze in this data. And for example, we are still trying to find out what happened in each country and when. Because, well, all those lockdowns and curfews, it was very difficult to track. I still don't know what happened in the Czech Republic, but we will know more soon. We will keep on analyzing. But beyond COVID, there are many other questions that we are looking forward to exploring. For example, network effects. Do anglers go fishing with friends? Do they affect each other's decisions or where to go or when to go? And even more exciting than these questions, I'm looking forward to diving in the data from the actual fish. Because with these sonars, we can know where all the fish are and what they are doing and how many there are. As a final conclusion, this analysis demonstrates that the data from angler devices has a huge potential. And it can help us predict how anglers will react to future changes in legislation, quotas, or other seasonal or spatial regulations. Or like our group leader says, it will help us guess what will happen when the AI replaces all our jobs. Before leaving, I would like to remind you of these other related talks by members of our team. Make sure you don't miss them because they are great. And if you want to know more about our research, you can visit this link. And finally, thanks to our funding support, and especially thank you for watching. I hope we can meet soon in real life and I get to visit Baltimore, but until then, thank you again and enjoy the rest of the conference.